Meanderment, 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 meanderment.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Billy Watson TV. It gives me great pleasure today to have a returning guest on. A guy who's done a lot of great work in the Paul is Dead conspiracy and very many other avenues of what you could call the truth movement or whatever that is. Mike Williams, so welcome to the show again. Mike, how are you doing today, pal?
I'm doing well, Billy. Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
That's cool. I've not spoke to you for a couple of months because you've had the birth of your grandchild there. So
Yes.
you've been up here, you've eyeballs, I'm guessing, and helping the family with the new addition.
Yeah. So my wife and I have spent a lot of time with the baby. In fact, my daughter was over yesterday with our grandson. And so it has slowed some of the presentation stuff up a little bit. But if it's going to slow up a little bit, that's a good reason for it to slow up.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he's a beautiful boy.
That's cool. It must be great, having your child have a child themselves, then you can take it for short bursts and then hand it back and see how that feels.
Exactly.
So anyway, I watched a recent presentation with Sallie Witte, which was absolutely fantastic, and I watched that a second time, and it kind of hit home more the second time, just exactly the implications of this. So would you like to talk about that? Just give an introduction to Sallie, and I believe you're on a roundtable with her as well. She's quite knowledgeable, not just about this thing that she's discovered, and but also in general about the whole Horus thing, etc., which we'll get into. Yeah, Sallie Witte.
Yeah. So Sallie and I have been colleagues for a number of years. And whenever I talk about the folks that I'm networked into, I always say there's about 5 to 6 folks that are connected. We're a loose group of researchers. I mean, we don't spend every waking day communicating with each other, but we do stay close when we come up with new information or information that we want to share. And Sallie is one of those researchers. So she has been actually on all 3 memoirs roundtables. So she has been in the game for a while. And the way this came about, she was doing a lot of work on Pan, the mythological god Pan, and other mythological gods that are tied into Billy Shears, aka Paul McCartney. And initially what we were going to do, or what Sallie wanted to do, was to bring the artificial eye that Billy has, he's blind in his right eye, to bring it into the Pan presentation, because we wanted to tie it into the mythological gods, like Odin, as an example. Odin was a one-eyed god. He gave up one of his eyes for wisdom. And so the more I thought about it, I said to her that we have to put this out right away, that this discovery of Billy having an artificial eye is very, very important. And the reason why it's very important, because it is a very clear, tangible piece of evidence that allows us to differentiate between Billy and biological Paul, because obviously Paul had 2 good eyes, and Billy is blind in his right eye. He can see with his left only. And I told her I really didn't want to have this piece of information to get buried inside of a larger presentation. So she agreed that we should do a standalone show, and that's what we put up the other day, like 3 or 4 days ago.
I mean, as if the revelation that Paul McCartney has been replaced. This other one, this replacement all this time has had one eye. It's just like, hold on a minute, how did we miss that one?
Right. I mean, that's because you make an assumption that he has 2 eyes that are functioning perfectly, and so we all missed it. I came close to it in 2019 when I did my McCartney Stanshall presentation, where I was showing that Billy played the role of Vivian Stanshall in the Bonzo Dog Band with Neil Innes. And Neil Innes, of course, is of the Ruddles fame. Most people will know Neil by the Ruddles. And when I put that particular slide up, when I was presenting it, I showed an older version of Billy. That's the one right there. Very good. Thank you, Billy. And that's on the left is an older version of Billy, right, about his age now. And then on the right is Vivian Stanshall. And so when I looked at this back 3 years ago, I noticed that his left eye wandered or drifted. And that was a characteristic that I identified that connected Billy to his Stanshall character. But what I didn't connect was the fact that the left eye is the eye that can see, and the right eye, what we're looking at, is a prosthetic, an ocular prosthetic. It's an artificial eye or a glass eye. Right. And so in the recent presentation, the slide that you're showing right now, what I did was I took those two images and I split them up to show the left-hand side of Billy's face and the right-hand side of Billy's face. So the picture on the far left is Billy's right side of his face, and we can see his eye is looking straight ahead. It's looking right at us. That's the artificial eye. And then if we take that same image and then we slide the blue bar over, and we can just take a look at the left side of his face, that half of his face, we can see that his left eye is looking slightly to the left. So the right eye is looking straight on, and the left eye is looking to the left. So then I took the Stanshall image, and I did the same thing. So when we look at Vivian Stanshall's face from the right side, his right side on our left, we can see his eye looking straight at us. And then when we move the blue bar over, we cover the right side of his face, and now we're looking at the left side. We can see his left eye, again, is drifting to the left. And as we now know, because of Sallie's discovery, the reason why we're seeing that is because Billy's right eye is an artificial eye. And when you have an artificial eye, it doesn't always track identically with the good eye. There could be some drifting, some lag, and we don't see it all the time. That's the other thing. People have written me and said, well, I've looked at images and I don't see it. Well, you're not going to see it all the time. It happens at certain points where the eyes don't track perfectly.
She mentioned also there might be a little tiny bit of air in there, so that could just cause it just to not follow as much, because it's like a prosthetic ball, and then it could be this thing, glass eye sitting on top of it. So occasionally it'll just touch his eye to get that air pocket out, and then it will start moving. But there's just sometimes a slight lag from the other one.
Right. So what happens is the glass eye, as I explained in the show, is not round and doesn't look like a marble. It's actually like a very hard contact lens. And that is placed on an implant. If somebody loses the eye completely, an implant is placed inside the eye socket. This is what Sallie explained. If they didn't lose the entire eye, in other words, that wasn't damaged completely, let's just say the eyeball was damaged, then they can keep the actual white part of your eye there, and then the prosthetic, the ocular prosthetic, or the glass eye goes on top of what's already there. And yes, and she said what happens is if air gets under the prosthetic, the glass eye, then what happens is if you press it, and we see Billy do this, and Sallie said that she does it all the time as well, it forces the air out from underneath the prosthetic device, and then it's more comfortable, right? I guess it would be like if you got air under a contact lens.
Yeah, this is the thing as well. Sallie's been involved in all these shows, but she's actually got the glass eye. That's probably why she spotted it, because she says that's like me,
Exactly. So that's the thing, right? So her discovery has so much credibility behind it because she has a glass eye. So in Sallie's case, her glass eye is on the left and Billy's is on the right. So she knows all about the surgeries and the process and what goes on when you have a glass eye. And I'm glad that you brought this slide up as well. So one of the other identifying characteristics of somebody with a glass eye is the eye with the prosthetic eye, the eyelid above the eye protrudes. It pops out a little bit. And we can see this on Billy's right eye. So if we look at his left eye, which is on our right, look at the top of the eyelid. We don't have this kind of protrusion or puffiness. And then if we look at his right eye, which is on our left, we can see it. And the reason why we're seeing that is because the eyelid is sitting on top of the glass eye or the artificial eye. So naturally, it's going to push out a little bit. And if you look at other images of Billy, you're going to see this phenomenon.
Yeah, it's very noticeable in that one. And yeah, as you say, once you see it, then you see it all the time. It's amazing, I think, how they can get this thing to follow the other eye so closely most of the time. It's a wonder it doesn't happen more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we've also got this image here.
Yeah, right. So this comes from a live performance that he did at the Ed Sullivan Theater in 1992. So Sallie sent this image over. In fact, we played a piece of this video in the presentation. So when you first look at the image on the left, Billy, you're not thinking too much about it. It looks like he's just glancing over to the left. But then when we divide the face up again, like I did in the previous slide, we can see in the center picture, that's Billy's right side of his face. Again, we're looking at it, it's on our left. We can see the artificial eye is looking straight at us. We're looking straight ahead. And then when we take a look at the other half of the picture and we block off the right side of Billy's face and we focus on the left, that's his left eye, that's his good eye. And we can see his left eye is looking straight left, right? He's looking left.
That's really weird, that one, because in the first one, it does look they're both looking to the thing, and then when you separate it, it's like, oh my God, he's looking right at me.
Right. And that's what I've been doing. In fact, I've got this little card right here.
Right.
And so what I've been doing is looking at various images and doing that and dividing up the face. And it's amazing how many times you see that happen where the alignment of the eyes is a little bit off. Now, the thing with Sallie's discovery, I mentioned, it is a tangible piece of evidence which allows us to delineate or differentiate Billy from biological Paul. But the other thing that it allows us to do, Billy, is it allows us to be able to distinguish between Billy's doubles. Because Billy had doubles, and to this day, he uses a double according to memoirs.
Who's this guy?
Yeah, let's talk about that in a second. Keep that one up there. And as I mentioned before, it also significantly ties Vivian Stanshall into Billy. In fact, to me at this point, I don't know how you feel about it, it's undeniable that Billy played the version of Vivian Stanshall in the Bonzos.
Well, this is another thing there's another thing for people to get their head around. You just hit them with Paul McCartney's replaced. He's got a glass eye. Now he's Vivian Stanshall. If they've never seen this before, it's like, what the hell's going on? But once you look at all the evidence that you have went out of your way to, document and provide as a presentation, no matter how many times you look at that, you go, yep, that's him, And then you see the guy who plays him sometimes, the actor. And that's obviously not him, but that was an interesting bit of this video you done with Sallie as well.
Yeah. So the thing with Stanshall, a lot of people can't see it, right? It's understandable because it's almost incomprehensible that when I talk about I'm talking about the controllers, would go to this extent to do the things that they're doing to pull this off, right? To pull this conspiracy off. But yeah, so here we have the wandering eye. Again, that was the title of my slide going back to 2019. But you have to ask yourself, what are the odds that the guy on the left, known as Paul McCartney, and the guy on the right, known as Vivian Stanshall, have the same exact eye configuration?
Yeah, exactly. And all the other facial features, but this
and other facial features. In fact, the reason why I chose that picture initially was because you could see that they're the same guy. It's just that the guy on the left is an older version of the guy on the right. I mean, even their hair.
He's not hating hair anymore, is he?
The same way. And somebody might say, well, the nose is different. Well, that's because Billy has had nose surgery over time, plastic surgery to fix the nose. So the Stanshall's nose, his original or his biological nose, the nostrils really were kind of spread out a little bit. And over time, there were surgeries that took the nostrils in more and more to give it more of that Paul McCartney look. But yeah, the chart on the bottom right, that's the same guy. And then on the left, we have the subliminal clues. And so when Sallie sent the picture on the left to me, where Linda's looking into Billy's eye, I said, well, what's the significance of that picture? And she said to me, Mike, this is what your partner or your spouse or your kids do when they speak to you. They position themselves so that you can see them with your good eye. Doesn't make any sense for Linda to talk to his right eye because he's blind in his right eye. So they're always going to position themselves to speak to whoever has the person with the blind eye, whichever eye they can see with, they will position themselves so that the person who's blind can see them.
It's
And
like
that's what Linda's doing in that picture.
you cover your eye and you look around, you know, you're going to do that. So they're going to place themselves in that vision and look more intently into that eye because that's the eyes looking at them. That's irrelevant, you know. And
yeah, exactly. And that's what I said in the show. If you take your hand and you cover one of your eyes, then if I have my left eye covered now. If I try to look to the left, but my nose is in the way, I have to do this, turn my head all the way this way to see what's going on the left-hand side of me. So that's what Linda's doing there. And then the image on the right is very, very peculiar.
Yeah.
You know, Sallie and I were wondering, is that even Paul McCartney or one of the doubles or lookalikes?
It doesn't look like the original. It looks so fake, yeah.
Yeah, I had said, well, the hair is parted on the wrong side, and I guess somebody can argue that the image could have been mirrored. That could be, you know, but even that, when I look at it, that does not look like biological Paul to me. And to top it off, that looks like a wig that person's wearing. But I'll let people decide for themselves. But the more important thing with this image, whether it's biological Paul or not, is the fact that he's holding up 2 glass eyes.
Yeah, crazy.
And that's what the eyes look like, folks. Remember, before I was saying they're not like marbles or balls. They're like thicker contact lens. I think they're made of acrylic. And here we have this Paul McCartney character holding up 2 ocular prosthetics. Why is he doing that? See, I originally had that image, Billy, because I thought it was playing into the one eye symbolism, and it is. But now that we know what we know because of Sallie's discovery of Billy having sight only in his left eye, it takes on a whole different meaning. Yeah, and that slide came from
your presentation.
My presentation, yeah. And the image on the right is what an ocular prosthetic or a glass eye or a plastic acrylic eye looks like. And someone with an ocular prosthesis is altogether blind on the affected side and has one-sided vision. So Billy can only see out of his left eye.
Yep. And that clip where we split it and he was looking to the left, when he's playing the piano, she also mentions that the microphone's always coming in on the right where his blind eye is. And you can see him just the way he's playing the piano, and you know, he's looking around at the band, and you can see it's that eye, it's working all the time, you know. It's becomes obvious. Right.
And in fact, in one of those clips, he goes to look at the guitar player. And when he does this, he's actually, with his left eye, he's actually looking around the microphone. You can see him, and he's turning his head this way so that he could see the guitar player who's on his right. Well, normally you wouldn't have that extreme turning of the head to do that, right? If you and I, because both our eyes work, we would just look like this, look that way, and we can see the guitar player or whoever is on our right side. But yes, like I said in the show, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Yeah, so this is a still that came from the video Queenie Eye. And again, we could see his right eye is kind of glancing off further to the right than his left eye. So in other words, the eyes aren't tracking. They aren't aligned to track together. And that's because Billy's right eye is an artificial eye.
Yep. And there's a couple of interviews. There's one, I think it was on late night TV or in a different country, and it was all over the place. And then he had to touch it, or he rubbed it in that one. It was very obvious.
Are you talking about Katy Perry?
No, no, Paul McCartney. Well, you know, Billy. He was on a late night show, and he was basically, it was just the window was beside him, and he had to actually rub his eye quite visibly like that, and then it fixed, you know. So it's an obvious before and after kind of thing.
Yeah, to get the air out. I called it kind of like trying to reset the eye. Maybe he was feeling it was off, and he could sense it, so he was trying to correct it. I mentioned Katy Perry. I think it was Katy Perry.
Yeah.
Recently, where she was holding down her left eyelid, and people were thinking, "Hey, Mike," they were writing me and saying, "Does she have an artificial eye?" I said, "I don't think so. I think that was just blatant, overt calling out of one-eyed symbolism." That's my take on that one.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
this is an interesting slide. This is one that came to me. A listener, Esteban, sent me the image on the left of Billy, and I got that the other day, and I laid it up against the image of Stanchel, the same image we looked at before. So when you look at this is the same guy. So let me just take you through the slide a little bit. This is the first time I'm presenting this, Billy, on your show. So
okay.
what I'm telling the audience to do is to notice the overall facial structure. Look at the jawline. Look at the mouth, the mustache. I mean, he didn't even change the mustache in this one,
Yeah.
And I know it's a little difficult to take a look at the ear on Stanchel because the hair covers more of it. But if you take a look at the bottom part of the ear right above the lobe, it's the same ear structure. So this is the same guy. Now, in both images, Billy's right eye, the eye he's blind in, looks straight ahead with regard relative to what he's looking at, as his left eye appears lazy or drifts to the left. This is what we see a lot. The left eye appears to be lazy, but it's not. The left eye is his good eye. It's the right eye that's not tracking with the left. And then somebody might say, well, the nose looks a little different. It does, and that's because Billy has had surgeries to narrow his nose over time to make it look more Paul McCartney-ish. But even with that, when we take a look at these two pictures, we can still see very strong similarities between the nose. And then we have the eyes. And aside from the fact that we now know that the right eye is artificial and the left eye is the good eye, there has been eye surgery done. Okay, so I think it's called blepharoplasty. Okay, tricky word. And it's a procedure that surgically removes excess fat, muscle, and skin from the upper and lower eyelids to redefine the shape of the eye. It's very important to redefine the shape of the eye because over time people said to me, well, I don't know how they can reshape the eyes. Well, all you have to do is to do a little research. And there are surgeries that can do that. And and even in that image there, Billy, if you bring it back up, where it's, we can take a look at the eyelid at the top of Billy's right eye on the picture on the left-hand side. We can see it's puffy or protruding out a little bit. Again, that's because of the ocular prosthesis. It's because of the glass eye. And we don't see it so much on the Stanchel image. And I asked Sallie about that, and she said a lot of it has to do with age. So as you get older, you're going to see more of that puffiness or that protrusion. But that's the same guy, folks. So if you wanted to know what Billy looked like before he was Paul McCartney, it's the image on the right. And what we also have on the left-hand side is he's wearing a hairpiece.
Yeah. It's crazy to think that's what he was like, this ginger-haired, almost not quite ginger, but, Scottish heritage. It's let's turn this guy into Paul McCartney. Okay.
He dyed his body hair too, because people will say to me, well, Mike, he's got black arm hair, and how does that happen? And in memoirs, it explains to us that he actually used to do full body dyeing of his body. And, to check that out, I checked with somebody who is an esthetician who does that type of work. And I said, is it possible to dye the body hair on the entire body? And they said, yes, of course. Of course you can. So, yes, so that's the...
often, though, it'd have to get repeated, I would imagine.
Yes. So he would have to get that done, probably, I don't know, every 6 to 8 weeks or whatever, or depending upon when he decided to show his chest hair or whatever. He could have just done his arms, you know what I'm saying? So but this is the extent of what was taking place. So we know that he had surgeries. We know that he was using latex. He was using hair pieces. Um, he was dyeing his body hair. And this, again, this seems crazy and inconceivable to the average person. But when you're talking about a major psychological operation, these are the types of things that get done in order to pull the psychological operation off. They don't leave any stones unturned.
Yep. And they've got stuff like this that kind of shows it's kind of premeditated, this whole thing, with the original Paul McCartney being involved in it, which might, again, make people wonder what the hell's the deal with that. Because there are rumours of Paul McCartney kind of saying he was having dreams he was going to die and stuff like that. I don't know how mainstream that is, but no, he's still not dead, so it's no mainstream. Sometimes you live in conspiracy world, you think everybody knows it, but there was talk of him, wasn't there? He was going to die and having dreams about it.
Yeah, he was having dreams, yeah.
Do you think that was like, he knew he was going to die, or he was getting premonitions that all this shit he was involved in was going to come to a bad end?
Yeah, so that's, Memoirs says that he was having these nightmares. Now, it could be that it was the result of, now again, I'm just telling you what Memoirs is telling us. Okay, you can decide for yourself, you know, the folks that are listening, whether it resonates with you or not. But Memoirs tells us in October of 1963, the Beatles entered into, well, Paul McCartney and John Lennon entered into a Faustian bargain, a deal with the devil.
Yeah.
And that was 7 months after the release of their first album, Please Please Me, right? So what the controllers did was to whet their appetite with success and fame with the first album. And then, you know, we could probably fill in the blanks as to how the dialogue went. It probably went something like this. Do you like the fame and fortune? Do you like the notoriety? Well, there's more of it. You just have to do a couple of things. Well, what would that be? And then they enter into a Faustian bargain. And the question becomes, how much did the Beatles really know? How much into the occult were they? I get asked that question all the time. And my response is that they were young guys. They were certainly aware that they were participating in something that that was deceptive, right? Because in my work, I've shown that they did not write all their own music, and they did not play on all of the recorded tracks, especially between the period of 1962 through 1966. So knowing that alone, and knowing that the press and the stories and the narrative around you is that you are two of the most prolific, brilliant pop songwriters of all time, and you know that you didn't write those songs, then you know that you're part of a deception. So we, at least at that level, they knew that there was a huge
around as well.
Yeah. So, and also, folks, you know, when you listen to their live performances when they were playing live and doing their tours, really starting in 1964 when they came to America, and that was called The Beatles Conquering America. Every time they introduce a song, listen to what they say. They don't say, this is a song I wrote. This is a song that John wrote. This is a song that Paul wrote. This is a song that George wrote. They say, this is a song that Paul sang or John sang, or they just say, this is a song off our most recent album or our most recent single. They don't take ownership. They don't claim authorship of those songs. And in a way, it's a form of masterfully speaking.
It's like the Ringo Starr interview.
Yeah, people fill in the blanks. People, just because of the narrative around them, assume that that's what they're saying, but they're never actually saying that they wrote these songs.
It's like the Ringo Starr interview. Remember the Ringo Starr? He was saying, you know, the songwriters.
The songwriters.
Yeah.
And he said that John and Paul were primarily the singers.
Yeah.
Mainly the singers, I think he said, which is kind of interesting too. He said John and Paul were mainly the singers. Does that mean that there were others that sang? Yeah. I don't know what that means, right? But it's kind of an odd way that Ringo phrased that. But he clearly said the writers, and he did not associate the writers to Paul McCartney and John Lennon. If John Lennon and Paul McCartney were the songwriters, he would have said, with John and Paul being the brilliant songwriters that they were the backbone of the Beatles. I mean, that would have been the thing to say, but Ringo does not say that in that interview. And I think that interview went back to 1980. It was a
You said it,
1980
you said it
interview.
twice. He made the point twice.
He
Oh.
made it twice. By the way, his date of his death reduces to 9/11.
All right. Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. So, but in any case, going back to this this slide, Billy, yeah, these types of images are plentiful. You'll see them where Paul McCartney is making the one-eyed symbolism, or the eye of Ra, or the eye of Horus. And Ra is the right eye, Horus is the left eye. Ra represents the sun, and the left eye, the eye of Horus, represents the moon. So you'll see it both ways. You'll see them covering their right eye or the left eye, depending upon which Egyptian god they're looking to represent at the time. But pictures like that are, like I said, they are on the internet. You can find them for yourselves. I found plenty of one-eyed symbolism having to do with Paul and John Lennon. Hidden hand symbolism, Masonic hidden hand, lion's paw. There's a lot of images. You just have to know the images, the symbolism, and you'll pick up on it.
Yep. Sorry, my alarm's going off on my door there.
That's okay.
My son's going to get it. Yeah. I was looking at this picture here, though. See the one on the right there? The eyelid look different on that one as well, a little bit, which is a bit strange.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Looks like the right eye is drifting a little bit, right?
Yeah, it does, and the eyelid again. But
yeah. See, here's the problem with a lot of these images, right? So, we cannot discount image doctoring.
Yeah,
there was I shouldn't say a lot, but there was a ton of doctoring of images going back to day one. So the way they were able to pull this off was, number one, they had doubles and lookalikes that were being photographed. They had, along with images of the biological version of the Beatles, so we'll just pick on Paul McCartney as an example. I was told that from day one, there were, quote, 4 Paul McCartneys right out of the chute. There was the biological version, and there were 3 doubles or lookalikes. And we can see one of those doubles, a really good one, during the Melody Maker Awards. Yeah. Right? Yeah. That's a very, very good double. So there were 4 in play from day one, and then what they did was there were certain images that they played around with, they doctored, and what the controllers were looking to do, and they did successfully, was to create a composite image of Paul McCartney. So, because there were so many different versions and iterations of what he looked like,
yeah,
over time. Remember Billy with the mullet, that whole period, right? There were so many different variations of what he looked like. What happens over time is the mind just accepts that whatever current iteration or version you're looking at is him. And people didn't understand that what you were looking at was the biological version of either Paul or Billy, along with lookalikes and doubles. And then we have images that were doctored over time. So they had this whole, pot of stew of stuff that they threw out to the public. And so we got this composite version, or this composite image of Paul.
It's amazing. If you show somebody 9 different pictures individually of the old Paul McCartney and the new one, Billy, etc., over the different time periods, they'll go, yep, Paul McCartney, Paul McCartney. And then you put them beside each other and you go, is that the same person? And basically, a lot of times it's like 9 different people almost.
Yeah. I have a slide like that. It's titled "Not the Same Guy." So I have this, this image of Paul McCartney, let's say going back to 1964 as an example, and then there's an image of quote Paul McCartney from the Wings days, and you can clearly tell that they are 2 very different people. One guy has a much longer face, a higher forehead. It's a different guy.
Yeah. Here's the hide it as well. This again, the one-eyed symbolism, but this was quite interesting in the album cover, or Let It Be. Just want to go into that one a wee bit.
Yeah. So if we look at Let It Be, we have the shadowing effect taking place. So take a look at quote Paul McCartney in the upper right-hand box. So that's the eye, the right eye. That's the eye that it's blind for Billy, and we could see that it's shadowed, it's shaded, and that's the one-eyed symbolism. And we can see that the rest of the Beatles are looking off to the right, and also the wall or the background where we see, quote, Paul McCartney is red, and that's representative of blood. So what can we take from that? A blood sacrifice, ritual sacrifice. I don't know. We can definitely, let's put it this way: we can't discount it. But the one-eyed symbolism is everywhere. And before I get to this one, there was somebody who commented on my recent video, and there are people out there that they just can't get their heads wrapped around how occulted the reality is, and that the controllers are occultists. And they said, all this one-eyed symbolism stuff and this shadowing, that's known in art as the Rembrandt effect.
Oh yeah, because my girlfriend's a photographer, so she's comes from that kind of training. Yeah,
so they just want to chalk it up as the Rembrandt effect. But if you do a deep dive into Rembrandt, he was a Freemason.
Yep.
And he do
a triangle here as well.
Yes.
That's what she says, the triangle of light there.
And he utilized the lighting effect to represent duality, the dark and the light.
Yeah.
And so I explained to this person as in the comment section that you are embracing the narrative that's put out there for the profane. That's the explanation that they give you. And to the degree that everybody embraces the official narratives and the official stories and explanations that are given to us, it's going to make it that much more difficult to get out of this ditch that we're in, that humanity is in. Because when you believe their stories, when you believe their explanations, you're actually helping them. You're enabling their agenda because there's no resistance.
Well,
so it might very well be called the Rembrandt effect, but the truth of the matter is, it is one-eyed symbolism going back to the ancient mystery religions. And what I mentioned in the show, Billy, is the controllers think of them as mystery religion fundamentalists. They're religious zealots. And they are completely immersed in the mysteries, especially the Egyptian mysteries, along with Babylon, along with the mythology going back to Egypt, Greece, Rome, and so on. But it really does center in the Egyptian mysteries because Crowley's a big piece of this. And where they're going with all of this is Crowley's Aeon of Horus. So when people don't see this stuff after you explain it to them, you're trying to walk them through it. You're trying to explain to them that this is what they're actually telling you, because it is signs and symbols rule the world, not words nor laws. And everything about the controllers is signs and symbols, which includes the numbers. Yeah, so on this chart here, which I sent you,
so I was just going to say just what the Beatles done, just how big were the Beatles, like you're kind of saying that Paul McCartney's going to be this guy representing Horus, but look at the change in the world that the Beatles created. There was such a huge play by them. You can't kind of understate its significance, and what you're about to say is going to make more sense, obviously, because of that, it's a serious thing. It's not a joke.
Yeah, and people will say today, they'll say, well, the Beatles aren't a big deal to the youth today. But the thing is that what they don't understand is the Beatles are the foundation of all of the pop music today. So my wife and I were having this discussion the other day. There are artists today that, in all likelihood, they weren't Beatle fanatics, Beatle fans. But what do they always talk about? They always talk about their reverence for the Beatles, or their reverence for, quote, Paul McCartney. So it's not even relevant whether they actually grew up with the Beatles. It's how the music industry and the entertainment industry is constructed to always point back to the Beatles because of what the Beatles represent. The Beatles represented a complete shift in traditional values, and also they were there to dismantle institutionalized religion, and in particular, Christianity. And the reason why that had to get done was Christianity was in the way of their new religion, which was, and I should say it is, and what it's going to be if they succeed, which is Luciferian based, it's pagan based.
Yep.
And in Memoirs, it tells us that the controllers declared war on Christianity back on September 11th, 1962. And that's really when the Beatles were front and center. So the Beatles really kicked that whole thing off. And on this chart here, we see, on the left-hand side, this is the iconic eye of Paul McCartney. In fact, there's an album that he released where that is the cover of the album. And
Wow.
What is that eye? Well, if you look at that eye, that's why I put the image of Horus on the right. It's the eye of Horus.
Totally. That's undeniable.
Yeah, it's the eye of Horus. And I was what I pieced together based upon the 2021 version of Memoirs, that edition. There's a new one coming out, by the way. It was supposed to have been out a few days ago, but I did contact Tom, and he said that Amazon was having some issues with images that Tom wants to include in this edition of the book.
Right.
But I don't know much about what's in this book, other than Tom told me there's more on the Eon of Horus. But even if we go back to the 2021 edition of Memoirs, it explains to us that biological Paul has the role of Osiris and Billy is Horus. And there is this ritual enactment that the controllers are playing out, which results in Billy symbolizing, whether it's in actuality or it's symbolic, okay? Perhaps the controllers think it's actually literal, meaning he is the incarnation of Horus. I don't know. I'll let you decide. That's his role. And Horus is known as the liberator. And so when we entered into the Eon, or the age of Horus, according to Aleister Crowley, this meant that humans, man, woman, would follow their true or pure will, that they wouldn't be shackled by a rules-laden society or a culture, that you can actually be you. You can follow your will. You can take your internal will and you can manifest that into your external world. In other words, there would be an unshackling, there would be a liberation of freedom to humanity. And it all sounds great until you realize that they plan on doing this with a whole lot less people.
Yeah.
So there's a depopulation effort that's underway right now. That's what all of this stuff, right, that's going on. It started in March of 2020. This is what this is all about. And that's what Agenda 21 is all about. And this period between 2020 and 2030 is the depopulation period. Now, how successful they're going to be is going to be determined by how many people wake up. But if they have their way, there's going to be a lot less people walking around in around 7 years. And so they're actually looking to the 22nd century as their new age. That's what I think. And that the rest of the 21st century is going to be a process of, in alchemy, it's called Negredo. It's the breaking down, dissolving, and the elimination of the old so that you could create the new. In Crowley's teachings, he said that you cannot build something new if you still have remnants of the old in existence. It's got to be completely taken out. So out with the old and in with the new. And the Beatles, as an entity, have played a significant role in bringing about this new age, in changing the way people think, the way people behave, the way they act. And like I said, they are the foundational base of all of pop music since then.
And yet, why would then some people actually smear the book memoirs? I know that's how you got into this, and a lot of people say that can't be, Paul McCartney writing this and revealing all this stuff. Is there some kind of magic involved in us even reading the book and then doing all the codes and kind of getting more and more involved in it, and it's getting the story more and more out there? It's almost like it's serving the agenda at the same time as we're kind of finding out about it. Is there power in them revealing it, or is it just Billy wants to get something off his chest before he goes? It's probably all the magic ritual. His whole life seems to be this. He's just, he's born, he was tortured, he was programmed, and he's going along with this agenda. Is he doing it voluntarily, or is just programmed to be this guy who they've set up to be this Horus?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's tackle the question first about the detractors that claim the book is fiction and all of this stuff. And the question to ask people who continue to go on about that is, did you read the book? And what you're going to find is 99 out of 100 times, the people who are yammering on about this, about the book being fiction, they haven't read the book. And as we were talking before we got onto the show, Billy, it would be like you're going to go buy a car and you're looking for car reviews in a car magazine. And there's a guy that wrote a review about a car that he never tested or ever drove. Yeah. Well, how much credence would you put in that guy's review if he never tested the car? Well, I hope the answer is none. And so for all the people that are walking around who haven't read the book, yet have something to say about the book, it's uninformed opinion. That's all it is. And I've explained over and over again, Memoirs is a Masonic book. I didn't realize this when I first started reading the book. And it's layered. And what layered means is it's encoded. And you have to learn how to decode the book. And once you decode the book, then the book reveals the truth. And what I have been saying since day one is Memoirs is truthful. Does it have elements of fiction in it? Yes, it does. And why does it have that? So that the book, the author, Billy, and whoever else is involved in the book, and Billy is involved in the book, they have plausible deniability. They can point to certain things in the book and say, well, prove it. And the way Memoirs is written is the fictional aspects of it rely on what the reader refuses to believe. Think about that. So the reader actually defines the fiction on their own. So in other words, if you believe that Aleister Crowley is nothing but a carnival barker, and he has absolutely no influence within the pyramid of power, then when you read about Crowley in the book, you're going to say that's fiction because Crowley was a carnival barker. If you believe that Billy didn't play the Vivian Stanshall character in the Bonzos, then that piece of the book is fiction.
Yeah.
If you don't believe what Billy tells you about what the lyrics really mean in Beatles songs, then that part of the book becomes fiction. So the book is extremely clever in the way it's written and presented. And the other thing that the book does is it points you to go outside the book, to do your own investigation and your own research, which is what I did on the music. There was a very subtle hint in one of the previous editions. It was on page 350 and 351. And I'm going to paraphrase, but the sentence said that George Martin had taken their little songs and made them great. What does that mean? And then the next page, it was talking about the snitch and the Committee of 300. So I said, the snitch and the Committee of 300? I said, is he talking about John Coleman?
Yeah. And
that's what it was. And then once you read John Coleman's book on the Committee of 300, Coleman explains that the Beatles were a creation of Tavistock.
All right.
And he He discusses Theodore Adorno's role, although I disagree with Dr. Coleman on the extent of Coleman's role. Dr. Coleman claims that Adorno wrote all of the music, and I, in my research, found that I didn't think that was possible. I believe that Adorno was working hand in hand with George Martin. Adorno was overseeing the songwriting along with George Martin. Adorno was behind the curtain. George Martin was the in front of the curtain person. He was the public persona. Okay, the fifth Beatle, if you will.
Yeah.
But that doesn't say that Adorno didn't write some of the music. I believe that's very possible, along with George Martin having written some of the music. And I also believe that there were probably maybe a half dozen songwriters, especially during the 62 through 66 period, that were contributing to the song content. And studio musicians were laying down the tracks.
Plus, I don't know if Adorno or somebody probably had their eye on world music, because there's like lots of Hey Judah stuff taken from operas, so they would have had, that could be a hit with their extensive knowledge.
Neapolitan music, going back to those types of songs where there's no longer any copyright claims, and these are classics, and they were reworked. And I showed that with Yesterday and with Hey Jude in my big presentation. Did the Beatles write all their own music? But going back to the folks that go on and on about memoirs being fiction, again, the question to these folks is, did you read the book? And you're going to find that almost all of them have not. And for those that say that they did read the book, what I have found in the past is they read down-level versions of the book, and they went into the book biased. They went into the book with a wall. They were just they were going to read it for the sake of saying, I read it, but they had no intention of ever altering their position because of what the book was telling them. Because certain researchers, which I refer to as ideologues, want to hang on to their dogmatic narratives that they have created. Now, I'm not saying that some of these other researchers have not done some fine work. They have. But they reach a certain point where it doesn't, the work doesn't progress anymore. Or in most cases, the way it works is they want to preserve the Cinderella story, the official narrative of how the Beatles came together. There were 4 young lads from Liverpool meet Brian Epstein's a record store owner. He gets them signed to EMI under the tutelage of George Martin, and then they experience unprecedented fame and fortune. They want to believe that story. Okay, that's a Cinderella story. That didn't happen. That's not organic. And in another presentation that I did on the 1960 through 1963 period, I show step by step, taking people through that timeline, what was going on behind the scenes to move the Beatles through that timeline from their start in Hamburg in August of 1960 to when they show up in the United States in February of 1964. So in 3.5 years, they went from a very, very rough around the edges band of 4 guys that were not very good musicians. They showed absolutely zero talent as far as songwriting capabilities. And this is not just me saying this. I have clips of George Martin saying this, clips of their Hamburg manager, Alan Williams, their first manager, talking about them being a bum group. Don't bring that bum group to Germany. That was what he was told. Okay, so we have from Spin Magazine going back a number of years ago, Quincy Jones quoted as saying that they were no playing MFers.
Yeah.
Right. We have Bernard Purdy saying that there were 4 drummers on the Beatles records, and Ringo wasn't one of them. So a lot of times,
more easy to manipulate if they can't play the instruments and get involved in writing the songs, and say, well, we can manipulate these, and they can just be the image. We can do the background work. Yeah.
So the Beatles were actors and performers, and they took the show on the road. So their job was to be the veneer to take the show out on the road. That's what they did. So they were taught the songs. So the songs were written for them. They were then taught a certain number of songs, and those are the songs that they took out to play on their live gigs and their concerts, their 30-minute concerts that they did starting, we'll pick 1964 when they went to America. That was their job. But behind the scenes, it was a whole different operation behind the scenes. And what people don't realize is that was the model. That was the Wrecking Crew model.
Yeah.
And if people, all you need to do, folks, is there's a documentary out there called The Wrecking Crew. Watch it. That's how it worked. And I think the tagline on the front of the DVD is, there was one band behind them all. And also watch the documentary Hired Gun. So the Wrecking Crew takes you through how the music industry was run, how records were recorded from 1960 through the 70s, and then Hired Gun takes you from 1980s to current day. And your eyes are going to open up. And you know, people want to believe that the Beatles were the exception to the rule, but the Beatles weren't the exception to the rule. I mean, I have a clip of George Harrison saying that he never practiced his guitar.
Yep.
He said, hey, people call me a guitar player, but, you know, I'm not really a guitar player because I don't play my guitar all the time. In fact, in that clip, he says there were times when he hadn't played his guitar in years, and he only picked it up when it was time to record an album. And he said the same thing about Ringo. He said Ringo was very bad at practicing. He didn't practice. Well, I can tell you right now, I don't claim to be the greatest guitar player in the world. I don't claim to be the greatest songwriter in the world, but I will tell you this. If you don't practice your trade, then you're not going to be very good at it.
Yeah.
You know, that's just the way it goes. And really, it's great, Billy, because I have a lot of musicians on my Paul is Dead channel, and it's wonderful for them to chime in because they get it. They understand how this works. Yeah. I've got people who are songwriters, musicians, songwriters, sound engineers. They know how it works. And so when they contribute, whether publicly in the comment section or behind the scenes by sending me an email, it's just concrete validation that, you know, that is what was going on. But again, circling back, folks, Memoirs is encoded, and for folks that are going on and on about the book being fiction and all that stuff, you know, I've explained so many times, it is an encoded book. It is truthful once you decode it. I've tried to help people to decode the book, to understand how to do that. So, you know, just keep that in mind whenever somebody's talking about it. And again, I have nothing to do with the book. Zero. Tom and I don't work together. I don't work for Billy. I'm not a Freemason. I'm not with the Illuminati. It's unbelievable, all of these things that we hear. I'm an occultist. That's another one. You know, I'm hypnotizing people to not believe the official narrative, even though the official narrative is the conditioning. That's the hypnosis part. It's believing in the official narrative. That's the conditioning, and that's the brainwashing. And George Harrison's last album, Billy, right? What was the title? Brainwashed. Right? What was George telling us before he departed? So in any case, I'm sorry, I kind of got on a soapbox there. What other questions?
It had the mannequins and stuff when they do not have 5 mannequins on the brainwash.
5 mannequins. Yeah. And then when you looked at the shadowing, it showed us 4.
Yeah.
So his album cover was telling us there were 5 of them because we have to count Billy. But to the public, there were 4 Beatles because Paul McCartney, to the public, was always Paul McCartney. There was no Billy Shears. And the background of the album was orange. And orange, of course, in Pythagorean numerology is the number 33. And there was a television set, which is showing us that there was mind control. We were pumping this into your living rooms to condition you.
Yep.
And then we also had the pentagrams.
Yep.
Which brought in the stars, right? They showed stars on the album cover. In fact, folks, take a look at the album cover when you get done listening to this, and you'll see the stars. And one of the stars is projected prominently on the TV screen. So what George was telling us is that there was magic and occultism and all that stuff that was played out as well as part of this entire psychological operation known as Beatlemania and the Beatles.
Yeah, I was just trying to get the picture up there quickly, but it's not easy to do it. But yeah.
It's okay. Yeah, they could take a look at it. George Harrison's last album, Brainwashed. Let me take a look at it. Here it is. Yeah. Yeah, that's the album cover, folks. So you can see Brainwashed. There's the 5 mannequins. And then if we look to the left of the mannequins, the way the shadowing effect works, they're showing us 4. So there were 5 Beatles because we have to count Billy. But the public only knew of 4 because there was no Billy. Paul McCartney was always Paul McCartney, and we could see the television set that represents mind control. We could see the stars, which are pentagrams, which represents the occultism and the magic that was going on behind the scenes.
Yep. Here's one thing we'll kind of clarify. I think you've done this in your presentation. You said just now about the Faustian deal that they'd done after they had some success. Was that before they went to America? And do you think before then, because like, what's the history of their family? We don't know much about them.
Right.
Were they groomed from birth? And also, Billy, alongside them, seems to be groomed to fit in at this exact point, It's like pre-planned. How far back do you take that? And when did the Beatles themselves kind of know they were in the Faustian deal? Was that just them going to the next level with it? Or was that the first time you think that they got, hold on a minute, what's going on here?
Yeah, what happened was the Faustian bargain was, it was 7 months after their first album, debut album, Please Please Me, was released, which was released on March 22nd, 1963. So we have 322, which is the Skull and Bones number, which goes back to Genesis 322. And so what they did was they lured them in, talking up a big game, how they were going to be famous. And this is before the Faustian bargain, right? And we have to remember that George Martin did not want to sign the Beatles. We have to understand that. So they did their Decca audition on January 1st of 1962. They allegedly recorded 15 songs in around 6 or 7 hours, of which 3 were originals, nondescript originals. If you can believe 15 songs in 6 or 7 hours, I have a bridge to sell you. Okay. And then Brian Epstein tried to take tapes to George Martin to get Martin interested, and George Martin said, no, not interested. In fact, in an interview with his son Giles, he said that he thought their music was rubbish, and said in other interviews he thought they had nothing behind them and all of this stuff. And in another interview, he said that they didn't show any songwriting abilities. I have that clip as well. Okay, so George Martin was not high on the Beatles. I mean, he didn't think much of them at all. And Memoirs tells us that what happened was he received a call from upstairs from a superior, and he was told, nope, you got to sign them.
Right.
And so then they were signed in June of 1962, and the date we're given is biological Paul's birthday. Okay. Some people say that the date was actually earlier, but it might be obvious as to why they chose Paul's birthday because of the symbolism involved, right? But in any case, it was June of 1962, whether it was Paul's birthday or not. And when they were signed, George Martin didn't work with him. He assigned the task to another producer on his staff to work with them. And that producer, I forgot the guy's name. I should know this, but I forgot. It slipped my mind. He worked with them to get some recordings, and they didn't turn out well. The recordings didn't turn out well. So Brian Epstein and George Martin listened to to what was recorded, and it wasn't working. And so then George received another phone call,
Right.
and he was told, no, you don't understand. You need to work with them personally, one-on-one. You can't delegate this.
Right.
And so this was taking place mid to the latter part of 1962. And of course they released Please Please Me in March of 1963, March 22nd. So once George Martin was there, connected to them, that's when, in my opinion, the discussion points got to the point where, okay, big things are going to happen. And so the way this works in the music industry is they whet your appetite by giving you a level of success. And of course, you're relishing in it. I mean, if you're a bunch of young guys in your early 20s, like, oh, this is great. This is fantastic. Look at all this notoriety. It's all the girls, all the fame, some money. So, and then after they got pumped up and things got rolling, and they got Please Please Me out in March of 1963. Like I said, 7 months later, in October of 1963, we're told that's when they went into the Faustian bargain. That's when it really stepped up the game. So, and from there on in, you know, it was just this trajectory that was just skyrocketed them to unprecedented fame and fortune.
I think it was just John and Paul that done the Faustian deal.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know, you know, about George and Ringo. Ringo came on board August, September of 1962, because that's when the Mercy Beat article came out that said that Pete Best was out, Ringo was in. That's also the article that said that the Beatles were flying to London to record songs at EMI that were written for them, given to them by their producer, George Martin. Didn't say to record songs written by them. It was in black and white in the Mercy Beat article that they were songs written for them that were given to them by their recording manager, producer George Martin. Now, you know, we also see images of Paul McCartney and George Harrison with bird cages on their head. I think you and I might have spoken about this before. And bird cages represent mind control. It's Illuminati symbolism for Illuminati mind control subjects or slaves. And back in my presentation in April of 2020, I had mentioned that because of these images, I had suspicions that they were in mind control programs from an early age. And I also mentioned that we have very little information when we take a look at their families, their mothers and their fathers. So if we pick on Paul McCartney and John Lennon as an example, there's very little in-depth information on Jim McCartney, which was biological Paul's father, and Mary McCarthy, who was a midwife, who was his mother. And I've had people say, well, no, I found information on them. It's not a matter of finding just some information on them. We're talking about the parents of arguably the most famous singer-songwriter, musician, entertainer of all time in modern history, in pop music. And we have very little in-depth information on his parents. And in fact, on a recent show with Mark Devlin, I had mentioned when I went into Paul McCartney's Wikipedia page, and he mentioned his parents, at least when I went there a few weeks ago, there was no hyperlink for Jim McCartney anymore. It was just gone. And I found that interesting, you know. So then I did a search, and I did find some information on Jim McCartney, but it's very limited. And it's the same thing on John's father, Alfred, or Freddie. I think it's Freddie. They call him Freddie Lennon. And there's very little information. So I just found that very peculiar. And these types of situations, we find them in stories that have to do with children that went through mind control programs. You know, the home life, the parents, that story appears very sketchy, and it has gaps. Okay, so like I said, you know, I don't know for sure. This is speculation on my part because, and the thing is, we're never actually going to know. But when they put images out there with bird cages on their heads and other Illuminati symbolism, one-eyed symbolism, Masonic handshakes, a lion's paw, I mean, you're going to draw certain conclusions, you know. And I went out there early on and said that all four Beatles were Freemasons because of the symbolism and because of the fact that this was a psychological operation and the controllers were going to just drop any Tom, Dick, and Harry in those roles.
Yeah.
And there were researchers that were adamant, no, they're not Freemasons. And then when the evidence was becoming more and more obvious that they were, because they were engaging in this symbolism and hidden hand symbolism and the stuff I just mentioned, then they backed off and said, well, they weren't high-level Masons. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
A Mason, even at lower degrees, has very specific oaths. And those oaths come before everything else, period. And in order to pull this thing off, you had to have people who were in the Brotherhood that were sworn to these oaths. And so the Beatles had to be Freemasons. And clearly, Billy is sitting in the ranks of the Illuminati.
Yeah. Well, again, he must have been kind of primed for that role. With the other ones, you just wonder again how much he knew. And seems to be as John Lennon went on, he seemed to have rebelled a little bit against it, and spoke out as much as he could without coming out blatantly. Do you think maybe even his attitude was what led to him getting taken out, or do you think that was just? What do you think about that? Did he need to be silenced? He just made a double fantasy album.
Yeah, I think John. I think he got fed up with the whole thing, and but I also believe it's possible it was tied back to the Faustian bargain.
Right.
But whether his death was tied back to the Faustian bargain or not, if that indeed took place, right? He was dropping clues, a lot of clues about the Beatles myth, the McCartney myth, the Dylan myth. He had mentioned in the Rolling Stone magazine that by the time the Beatles got to America, they were old hands. He said they were craftsmen. And when he said craftsmen, he was right. It goes both ways. Craftsmen, Freemasons are known as craftsmen.
Yeah.
But also a craftsman is somebody who's very good at their craft, somebody who's very schooled and skilled at what they did. And the Beatles were very good at the performing in playing the parts that they played as actors and performers as this incredible band, right? This magical, mystical, brilliant band with these two great songwriters and so on. They were very good at playing that part, a part that wasn't real, it was fictional. But I think that that's what he meant when he said that we were craftsmen. We were very good at our craft. Now, you mentioned something about Billy. We should probably cover this. So when we talked about the eye, we talked about ritual abuse. Could it be? Yeah, it could be. Could it have been an accident? Yeah. But in memoirs, it tells us that his earliest memories of trauma-based mind control and trauma-based conditioning goes back to the age of 3. And so if this is the case, then this would mean that he was being shaped and handled to be at a certain place later on in his life, a place of influence, a place of power, a very important role. And the other thing that's mentioned in memoirs is children that are conceived from sex magic. And Crowley was huge into sex magic. That was his thing. They are considered to be very special, and they are immediately identified for positions of importance in the world. So they're going to leapfrog over a lot of other people because they were conceived during sex magic. The book also alludes to Crowley being Billy's biological father. So if we put this together, if Crowley is Billy's biological father, through the act of sex magic, and Billy was conceived because of sex magic, then he was identified immediately as a person of importance that was going to be handled and going to be steered through his life to a position of influence. And since the controllers are heavily, as I mentioned earlier, they are religious zealots, they are mystery religion fundamentalists, then the eye could have been lost due to ritual. And I know this sounds extremely, extremely bizarre to so many people. And in fact, I had an email from a good friend of mine this morning, a person that is very accomplished in his field. And he said to me, Mike, he said, do you really think it could, like, this ritual stuff goes that deep? And it does. And for people who doubt it, let me just run this by you folks. They send your kids to war. And what do you think war is? War is a blood sacrifice. That is what war is all about. They call it spilling blood. Blood has been spilled. So if they can just make a decision like that to go send your kids off to war, this type of stuff, I don't think that they lose any sleep over it. And the other thing we have to understand is that they live and exist within a world that we don't understand. So when you're born and bred into this system, Billy, as an example, has been born and bred into this system. This is all he knows. He doesn't know our world. He only knows to play to our world,
yeah,
so that he can reap the benefits from it. But it's not his world.
Yeah.
And that's what people have to understand. It's like kids that grow up in an abusive household. That's all they know. They think that everybody has an abusive household. They think all children are treated that way. All kids are abused or beaten or screamed and yelled at, that have physical, emotional, or mental trauma because they were subjected to it. They believe that all families are like this. And it's not until they break out, if they break out, that they realize that their situation was extremely dire and extremely dysfunctional. So we have to understand that about the people that are in the system. I'm not making excuses for Billy. I'm just saying we have to understand the environment, your environment and how you're raised and how you're brought up, who the people are that are teaching you, what you're being taught, what you're being taught is right and wrong. That shapes who you are. In the book, it says that he was tutored by Crowley for 10 years. Well, Billy was born in 1937. Crowley died in 1947. There's your 10 years. And his earliest memory of trauma, going back to a program, is age of 3. So it's very possible that, like I said, factoring all those things, and if he was conceived through sex magic, he was slotted very early on, Billy, identified very early on for a position. Doesn't necessarily mean it was the Beatles. It could have been something else where he was going to be very influential, a very, very important person in world affairs. And the Beatles are very, very important to the world. Millions upon millions of fans, which another way to say that is millions and millions and millions of people sitting in church in the congregation of the Beatles, known as Paulism. That's what we're told in memoirs. Paulism is a sect of Luciferianism, which was put in place in order to bring about the New Age, the Age of Aquarius, the Eon of Horus. And again, I know this sounds really crazy to so many people, but if once you understand what these controllers believe, what their foundation is as far as their philosophy, their ideology, and their spirituality, then you can start to put the pieces together. And why Billy is exposing this stuff in memoirs, you kind of touched on that, Billy. I believe it's because in Luciferian spirituality or Luciferian philosophy, however you want to label it, they believe you have to balance the spiritual with the physical. Okay? Luciferians will say that they're different from Satanists because Satanists don't have that balance. Satanists will focus almost exclusively, to the detriment of the spiritual part of it, on the physical world manifestations, what they're able to achieve and gather up and possess in the physical world, at any cost, by the way. Like if they've got to mow you over to get it, they will do it. Whereas Luciferians will say, we don't do that. We believe, yes, that you should completely optimize your physical world experience. Luciferians believe in existentialism, that when you're born, there's no implied benefit to being born.
Right.
Right? There's nothing special about being born. That's how a Luciferian would look at it. They would say, what becomes special is what you do with your life. But just being born is just being born. Now you're here. Now what are you going to do about it? And then they will say that they have to balance their spiritual with the physical. And if you don't have that balance, you're out of balance. So I think it's possible that Billy, doing what he's doing with the book, by exposing what he's exposing, is that balance, is part of that Luciferian philosophy on balancing the physical and the spiritual world. In other words, there's a deception involved, and he's got to balance that with the truth. So he's putting the truth out there. Yes, it's encoded, but he's putting it out there. And if you are intrepid enough, you'll figure it out.
Well, he even put it on his website with the lyrics on an official site. So it's not like he's hiding it as much as he used to.
No, he's not hiding it at all. He's not hiding it at all. And that's what people have to understand. You know, they say, well, he's doing it in a deceptive way. He's not coming clean. He's not just saying it, that he's not Paul McCartney. And you know what? It's never going to be said, folks, because like we said before, signs and symbols rule the world. That's why it's so important that you at least have some base understanding of the signs and symbols, because if you don't, then you're going to be wandering around aimlessly in the woods, in the world of the profane. And you're going to be living in a virtual reality. And what I mean by that is you're going to be living the reality that they have spoon-fed you. What most people believe, these thoughts are not their own. What they believe is what has been fed to them through the television set, through their environment, through their jobs, what they read. Your belief systems have all been manufactured and constructed for you. And it's a process of breaking that down. And that's why I did a video going back about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Billy, where you have to question the sacred cow. You have to question the official narratives that are out there. It's not just the Beatles. Official narratives exist for everything, right? The Apollo mission is an official narrative. The JFK assassination is an official narrative. 9/11 has an official narrative. Just pick one. And there's an official narrative. And these are the narratives, these are the stories that we're given. And the people who tell them are the storytellers.
Yep. And
people believe them without ever questioning them. And I used to be like that. I mean, there were things I believed. I would listen to it and read about it. The Beatles as an example. I believed the official narrative. I didn't question it. I thought they were all prolific songwriting geniuses.
Yep.
Until I had my epiphany, you know, and I started to poke at it, you know, and I started to question it. And as you know, I mean, the elephant in the room for me was the Rubber Soul album, you know, and I questioned writing 16 songs, writing, rehearsing, arranging, recording, and mixing 16 songs in 30 days. I'm like, well, that didn't happen, you know. So my questioning, you know, the Beatles narrative is just, it's a subset of the entire realm that's loaded up with narratives that are there for one purpose. It's to control you. It's to keep you unenlightened. It's to keep you with your head buried so that you don't look up, you don't come up for air. You know, it's like people can't see the big picture because they have their head. This is the analogy I use, Billy. Let's just say there's a table full of marbles, and let's just say that table has 100,000 marbles on it. But they've got people with their heads so far down on that table looking, they only see 3 marbles. So when you say to them, how many marbles are on the table? They say 3. And you're like, okay, lift your head up. What? Lift your head up. Why? Lift your head up. And then when they lift their head up, this is the awakening. And then you see, oh my God, there's 100,000 marbles on this table. And I've been staring at 3 my whole life. And that's most of humanity. Most of humanity has been looking at 3 marbles their entire life.
got your tale of woe. All this time with little to show. Gotta be a daddy who did you wrong, making you feel like you didn't belong. When you gonna get it? When you gonna get it? All those years when you didn't pay your dues, singing along to the little boy blues. When you gonna get it? When you gonna get it? Sitting around, wringing your hands, making believe you don't understand. Gotta be a mama who carried the load, pulling you along that rocky road. When you gonna get it? When you gonna get it? All those years when you didn't pay your dues, singing along to the little boy blues. When you gonna get it?